We stand for the true and north, the cities and skylines, the strong and free. For those who value the story and source, the opinion and fact, the context and clarity to help illuminate the path and potential, the drive and direction. We are the one and only, the Globe and Mail. What shapes your world?
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We've had a countdown clock in here. I feel like we're part of the astronauts down in Florida. It's very exciting. I'm Kathy Cunningham. I'm the Chief Financial Officer here at the Globe and Mail, and it's my pleasure to welcome you, all of the people in the room, and those of us joining us virtually from across the country, to today's conversation, the changing role of the CFO. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the Globe and Mail's headquarters, situated on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. My colleagues and I are grateful for the opportunity to live and work on this land. At the Globe and Mail, our role is to help business leaders make sense of complexity, to surface insight, ask the hard questions, and provide clarity at important moments. Perhaps that sounds familiar to all of the CFOs. It's fitting that we're bringing together a community that is navigating more complexity than ever. The role of the CFO has changed dramatically. Many of us were trained to be stewards of the numbers, focused on reporting, controls, and financial discipline. Financial reporting was on a cadence, budgeting was once a year. These fundamentals still matter deeply, but today they're only the starting point. In my own experience, being a CFO now means being at the center of strategy, of technology, investment, risk, both risk management and risk-taking. Data-driven decision-making, ensuring collaboration across teams, geographies, businesses, being at the center of the talent and long-term resilience of our organizations. But most importantly, we're growth partners to our businesses. It means helping our organizations navigate uncertainty and rapid change while still delivering performance and trust. Increasingly, we are not just asked, can we afford this, but does this move us forward? Can we go faster? What's our next step? We're needing to understand, to help manage and report on broader performance impacts, the outcomes for all stakeholders. We're asked not just what happened, but what's next. And of course, how are we using AI? I'm sure all of us are hearing, are we using it enough? Are you using it in finance? Are you using it as an organization? And are we getting the return from it? That's why conversations like today's matter. This is a room and a virtual audience of leaders who understand that the CFO's influence has grown, not because the job has become easier, but because it has become more essential. On behalf of the Globe and Mail, I'd like to thank our sponsor of today's event, CPA Canada. We truly appreciate you making today's event possible. I'm looking forward to the insights. Please join me in welcoming our moderator, Jameson Burkhoud, to get the conversation started.
That's me. Oh no, the clapping is very much for them. I am going to be speaking as little as possible. Just going to quickly introduce myself. I am the capital markets reporter here at the Globe and Mail in the section Report on Business. So I have witnessed from afar just the stunning evolution of the CFO role. And I'm really fascinated to get into it with our three esteemed panelists. So I'm not going to waste any more time. I'm going to jump right into it. There's Pamela Steer, our actually representative of our sponsor, so thank you again for that. She is the CEO of CPA Canada. Her career has spanned senior CFO roles. She was actually Canada's CFO of the Year in 2019, which was a tough year to be CFO, as was any year that started with 2 or 1. We have Atul Chandra. He is the CFO of Home Equity Bank, which is a fascinating institution over the last few years, and really want to maybe pick your brain after about that. But in addition to the last more than a decade at Home Equity, he's also held CFO roles at various financial services providers. And then last but certainly not least, we have Vanessa Kanu, the Executive Vice President and CFO. Do I need to say CFO for everybody? I am. At Aptar, and she has a quarter century of experience with global multi-billion-dollar and publicly traded companies. Her last job, to give a little Canadian tinge to it, was as CFO at TELUS International. And in 2023, Both Vanessa and Atul were recognized by the Globe and Mail's Report on Business magazine, which I assume you all read religiously, as Canada's Best Executive Award. So please join me in welcoming Pamela, Atul, and Vanessa. I want to start things off with almost a stage setter question for each of you, because all of you have such broad and differentiated experience. And when you first got into the finance world, I imagine you probably already had your sights set on the CFO role, the top of the mountain. But it not only must it have looked very different from where you started to when you got there, but I mean, the mountain itself changed while you were climbing it, right? So maybe we could start off talking a little bit about that. Pamela, I don't know if you want to start just because you're closest to me.
Well, thanks so much. It is a pleasure to be able to sponsor this event, and thank you to the Globe and Mail and to you, Jameson, as well as you, Kathy. It's great to see you again. So it's so funny that you use that analogy, because I use the mountain all the time to talk about it, because people talk about a career ladder, which is straight up and you're going to do one rung at a time. But the mountain analogy is so apt, because you're going to hit roadblocks, switchbacks, avalanches, which is the mountain changing as you're trying to mount the mountain. And you're exactly right. So when I started and I was, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed with my degree and getting my CA at the time, CPA now, of course, I had my sights set on, I want to be a CFO and maybe a CEO one day. And the job has changed and is changing at a more rapid pace than ever. And I've really loved that, because rather than being confined into a corner office working on numbers, you're actually really entrenched in strategy and business and the numbers. But broader than the numbers, we've moved into things like technology, like human talent and resources, like taking risks. And a lot of people think the CFO role is the role of no risks, but actually it's what risks make sense for our business. And so that climb on the mountain and the journey is as good as getting to that role. And there are many different flavors, even just sitting here, of what a CFO does. So that mountain climb has been really varied, challenging at times, but really exhilarating and exciting, and it continues to change. And so that journey is really, and that experience is what helps the, hopefully, CPA climb to reach that CFO level. And I'd love to hear my colleagues' opinions on that too.
Do you want me to go next? Absolutely. I don't know if this, it does work. I don't even know that I have much to add to that. I think that was so well said. Maybe the only thing I would say is, interestingly, to your question, when I started, I didn't have this vision of myself getting to CFO. It's an odd thing to say. I'm a very ambitious person, but I was not, so I didn't plan my career. It wasn't like, by this year I need to be here and I need to be finance director, then finance VP, then CFO. I was always a learner. And so, like Pamela said, I did my CA, and I found the CA just really interesting, really exciting, great training, teaching you critical thinking skills, those cases that were, always the bane of, the exams. And I just thought those were just a really good foundational way to understand how to solve problems. And so when I finished my CA with PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I was doing, various projects and then eventually joined industry, I didn't really think about getting to CFO. What I really thought about was, how do I learn and how do I get as much experience in different areas of finance as I possibly can. And then that later turned into getting experience in different areas of the business as I possibly could. And, to Pamela's point, because the role of the CFO, which by the way, also changes the role of the finance organization too, right? So because that role kept evolving and changing over time, I just found myself working on very interesting and exciting, projects and assignments and so on. And that's what eventually culminated to you getting to the CFO seat.
Well, I had a different path. Actually, I would say that I'm an accidental CFO because my undergrad growing up in India was as a chemical engineer. and I worked in a fertilizer plant. I came to Canada as a student to get my MBA, and I could not find any job at the time as a foreign student. The only job I got was with Ernst & Young to do, and they said you'll have to do as your CA. So that's how I became a CA. But having said that, it was actually a very good training. It gave me a lot of exposure to different businesses in Canada, and I did eventually move out of public accounting, and then, of course, eventually got an opportunity with Royal Bank to be the CFO of their one of their startup insurance companies. So that's how I got into the CFO path.
So now that you're here, though, what would you maybe have done differently now that, before we even get to that, actually, how is it different? What has been added to your role over the years? There are less and less chief operating officers out there because they've been subsumed by the CFO. So how do you take those roles on that perhaps you never anticipated taking on, were interested in taking on, maybe you were, but obviously it wasn't something that you were full on expecting. So how do you bake that into all the other obligations you already have?
So I would say that because my experience was also with startups, I've done 3 startups, including one for Royal Bank, and then I actually went back to India to do a startup for a Japanese company in India, cool. And then came back and I did the startup for ICICI Bank in Canada when they came to Canada in 2003. And I was founding CFO of ICICI Bank. So because of the startup experience, I would say that the expectation was that I will wear multiple hats. So as for example, at ICICI Bank, I was of course CFO, but also Chief Risk Officer, Chief Compliance Officer, Corporate Secretary, and the head of IT. So basically, and that I would say is not very uncommon for CFOs. I would say most CFOs, including in the audience, they would have had other roles beyond finance and accounting. Many of them would have had either HR or IT or risk or other functions reporting to them. So it is easier, I would say, to answer your question, Jameson, that it is easier for CFOs more than other executives to actually transition from just the finance function and go beyond that. And yeah, the CFOs can and they are expected and they are doing some of the roles that the CEO does.
I would agree with that. I think, and of course, we're all biased because we're CFOs, but I do think that, having that finance background makes us a lot more versatile. With a lot of respect to, my colleagues in marketing or sales or insert R&D, insert name of very important function, I do find that, CFOs, finance professionals are just, they can move easily from, function to function. And we see that quite often, right? And we now see more CFOs getting to the CEO role, which is what you've done. And I think that is directly related to the changing role of the CFO. Mm-hmm. When CFOs were, it's evolved, right? When CFOs were, the sort of back office bean counter, we weren't seeing CFOs be natural CEO succession candidates, right? And then we made that transition from back office bean counter to, the Enron crisis, and now everything's about Sarbanes-Oxley. So the CFO has to be the, controls and processes and everything else, compliance. We had to be the face of that as well. And then we moved through that transition to a lot more strategy-oriented roles. And so you see CFOs really navigating and really kind of being a bit fluid in across the business in different roles, the role that they have within the C-suite, projects that they're leading, the voices that they bring into the table around so many different topics that are not necessarily finance, but critical to the success of the organization, right? And so that has happened, and I think because we're more and more adept at doing that, we are now getting to be potential succession candidates for a CEO role, or even sort of replacing what used to be a COO role in many organizations, which, as you pointed out, doesn't really exist as much anymore.
If I can just add, so I agree, obviously. Okay, thank you. I agree with my colleagues. I would describe it as particularly the CPA, very biased, obviously. Our skills are incredibly transferable. And that's what you've both described. They are fluid. Also, if you think about it, finance is where everything comes together. So everything is translated into dollars and cents or headcount or risk, et cetera, and there's a metric applied to that. So your CFO naturally gets a lot of exposure across the business. And so that's partly why I think it's so easy. I'm not going to say it's easy. That's why it's so natural that expansion has occurred. And I think the final thing is that our training and discipline that we've had, particularly as you get that required experience, allows you to really understand, I think, some really good leadership skills. And you talk about, a CFO or somebody in finance. What do we know about technology? Well, we don't know about technology. We know about talent, though, and how to manage people. And we know about process and controls and understanding strategically what the goal is, and therefore, how do you get to that point? So trusting in your expert staff and having the management skills and those transferable skills of process and control and understanding, and the ability to dive deep if you need to and when you need to, and the ability to also stay at a strategic level, I think makes the big difference.
I think that's a really important point that I'd like Vanessa and Atul to expand on, because at the end of the day, you are just one person, right? And you still have to play that back office bean counter role, which was already more than a full-time responsibility. So I imagine building the right team to delegate, to know when to delegate and when to more micromanage certain tasks. How do you go about doing that? How do you choose candidates? How do you surround yourself with people who lessen the burden and expand your own productivity? What's the secret sauce in that? I don't know if Vanessa or Atul, whoever puts their microphone to their mouth first.
Do you want me to? Okay. I mean, that's what I would say we're all grappling with, right? Because you're in any role, whether it's CFO or any other role, you're really only as good as your team, and I truly, truly believe that. And the best CEO has a great team. The best CFO has a great team, and so on. And as the role of the CFO continues to change, the composition of that team also changes. And so what you see, for example, more and more, particularly in some larger public companies, you see the rise of the chief accounting officer. Going back maybe 2 decades ago, it was a little bit more rare to have a chief accounting officer and the CFO, because frankly, the CFO was kind of the chief accounting officer. And what you're finding now is, yes, of course, even when the CFO is signing the statements, they also have, even when the CFO could be the principal accounting officer as well as CFO, but typically they've got a super controller who really is doing the work of the principal accounting officer, right? And then in some companies, you actually have a formal role called principal accounting officer or chief accounting officer. So we're building the team composition to be able to enable the CFO to do all these different things. So principal accounting officer, sometimes super controller. FP&A has also evolved tremendously. FP&A is no longer just, hey, they do the budgeting, they run the monthly management reporting. FP&A has become a very strategic role. And in many organizations, to enable the CFO's success, you have the FP&A team who has really kind of evolved into what some companies now call strategic finance. That's really what it is, right? So to help the CFO think strategically, go underneath the number. So you got somebody running the accounting, the books, that's got to be perfect, especially for a public company, no errors, definitely no control weaknesses. But that's not all it takes anymore, right? The CFO has to be strategic. So you've got this other, superhuman working with you who's the head of FP&A, who's really now the head of strategic finance, that's helping you understand what's behind the numbers. And one of my pet peeves actually is when people say, let's financial analysis and business analysis, and to me they're one and the same. And kind of the point you made earlier, right? I mean, finance is where it all comes to. And what happens in the business gets translated into the financials. And so you need to have that team who's able to get underneath the numbers and able to tell you not just, hey, revenue went up 5%. And it's because it went up in Europe and in Asia. Okay, thanks. What were the underlying drivers? And that's what strategic finance, FP&A, has really kind of evolved to over the years. And of course, investor relations and all of those different things. And you're also seeing within CFO functions, newish type functions like finance data analytics or finance AI, finance systems, where in the past you wouldn't typically have that team inside of finance. You would rely on your IT organization. But we're learning now that for us to actually embed those skills within finance, that's really the only way we're going to make progress in terms of moving our own people forward with all the changes happening in technology, but also driving our own technological agenda. So long answer to your question, but the only way we can do it is by building a super team around us, and the composition of that team has also naturally evolved as the expectations of the CFO has evolved as well.
Yeah, so Vanessa explained that very well, and I would only add maybe a couple of comments to that. That essentially, as a CFO, you need to have the team members that Vanessa talked about, and basically be able to rely on them to actually do their job right, and then only then you can look beyond those individual functions and look at the bigger strategic opportunities. And I would actually use one example or analogy to explain what I'm trying to say here. Think of it as if the CFO is an orchestra conductor. And at that point, when you're a CFO, you may not be the best in terms of accounting, as she talked about chief accounting officer, in addition to CFO. You may not be the best in terms of knowledge for the tax regulations or regulatory requirements or any other matter, but as a orchestra conductor has to basically have the right people, the best pianist, the best violinist. You need to have the people around you and basically be able to pull them all together so that you can actually run the show and basically make it all happen.
So are there certain things you look for when you're building a team? Would you have a violinist trying out? Would you have them, play a sonata for you, or maybe a more close analogy would actually, right? Yeah, while jumping through literal hoops that are aflame. But yeah, maybe more practically, how do you identify candidates when there is such a diversity of roles under the CFO team now, and those roles themselves are evolving so quickly? What is it that you look for when you're sitting across from a candidate and thinking, on paper, this person looks great. What do I need to know from them in front of me to really make an offer to them?
That I would say is similar to any leader, whether it's a finance leader or IT leader. When they're building their team, they need to have the right skill set, but also the right environment for the team to flourish. And of course, then finance in particular, of course, has to have the right systems. Last year, for example, at Home Equity Bank, we implemented a new ERP system to make both the finance as well as HR function work more effectively. So the right systems have to be there, and also you basically give opportunities and challenges to the team members from time to time and test them out, help them grow, and eventually, I would say in the end, it's all about the trust with the team members, that you have to have the trust that every team member will do the right thing in order so that you can actually take a little bit bigger picture role as well.
Mm-hmm. So did you have anything?
Can I add to that?
Please.
Or I don't know if Pamela, if you wanted to add something. Okay, so fully agreed with all of that. Maybe the two other things I would add quickly. Clearly, you have to have a strong finance background, because that is kind of table stakes. You need to have a very strong finance background. If you're going to be in the finance organization, you've got to have, CPA training, ideally. But, there was a plug for Pamela and her team, but a very strong finance background. I would say beyond that, when I'm hiring people, I'm looking for, yes, obviously, what I just said, but really two things. Number one, a learning mindset and curiosity. Because things are changing so quickly around us that we can't rely on our past knowledge anymore. We just can't rely on that past knowledge anymore. And because, technology is changing, the geopolitics are changing, so many things are changing around us. And the things that come into the CFO's organization require us to be so agile and to be open-minded. And so for me, yes, the technical credentials are very, very important, because that gives you the strong foundation that we need. But on top of that, you got to have a learning mindset. You got to have curiosity, and you have to be willing to dig into the details. The 5 whys, all of those different things, to really help to get to the bottom of issues and eventually solve problems. Because the problems we're solving now, may not be framed as a financial problem, but eventually they will end up being, right? And so those great problem-solving skills are also very important.
I was absolutely going to say, learning mindset, curiosity, nailed it. Thank you very much for that. The one thing I would add is in terms of, and lots of people talk about fit with the team, but one of the things that I think is really important is to have a variety of thinking types. And so I will say, and my team who are here will say, I will jump to an answer very quickly. I'm often right. I can't help saying that, but...
Careful, journalists fact check these things.
I know, right? And I value very much, they drive me crazy, I value very much people who are more detail-oriented than I, much more process-focused. It does drive me a little batty sometimes, but I really value that process and that effective challenge, because you can't have all the same type of person around you and get to an optimal result. So having the learning mindset, the curiosity, the systems, the support, and then that extra ingredient of, do we have a variety of thinkers that can have an effective intellectual debate to make sure that we get to the most optimal outcome possible?
I love that. It's so true. It's so true. And I often say to get to the best outcome, you kind of do need to debate certain things sometimes. And you want people to be outspoken. I always say to my team, like, don't watch me go off a ditch. Tell me you're about to go off a ditch, right? If somebody has the best tax idea, but it's not practical for the business, I want my strategic finance people and my business partners, that are supporting the business units, to raise their hand and say, hey, here are the challenges as we see them. Don't just keep going because tax said so, or vice versa, right? So I fully agree. Yeah, thanks for that ad.
I'm resisting the urge so much to make jokes about the U.S. fiscal cliff now after your pitch metaphor, but this seems like of any audience.
Let's keep going.
Of any audience that would get them, this one seems like the one. Yeah. But I will hold back, because given the variety of thinkers in front of me, I would love to dig deeper into a comment, Vanessa, that you made about despite all the evolution of the role, that still having that sort of table stakes understanding is still critical, right? So I'd be curious to know all of your thoughts on the path to the CFO office today, right? It seems as though, your point is to suggest it's still important to go and get a finance degree, go get an MBA if that's really your ultimate destination that you have in mind. But I'm curious, what else, what other training, what other experience do you think would be worthwhile, given the massive expansion of the mandate that is, still ongoing as we speak?
Do you want me to start?
Absolutely not.
I would. Yes, all of the above, and the finance training is super important. I would say what is becoming even more or equally important these days are the soft skills, communication, collaboration, empathy. I think going back to the back office bean counter, it used to be that, somebody did that and then somebody else, communicated the strategy or did the strategy and communicated the strategy, right? And, somebody else did the bringing all the multiple functions together and how do we work, as a team. More and more these days, as much as it's great to have the strong finance foundation, there's the end, right? You've got to be able to communicate. And it's not only communicating, of course, as a CFO, it's communicating to investors and shareholders, but it's also communicating to employees and all of your other stakeholders and tailoring your message to the audience. It doesn't mean changing the narrative for every audience, but it means understanding, well, who's the audience and what is important to that audience? What are the key messages that need to resonate with that audience? Because every audience is going to be a little bit different, right? And having the ability to think differently, put yourself in the position of the audience, communicate as clearly as you possibly can, while also having some really great collaboration skills. Because, back to, your comment about, CFOs being no's, I actually... when I was at TELUS, one of our people jokingly said, she jokingly called CFO CF knows, and I still think about that, and I joke about it because that's kind of what CFOs used to be known for, CF knows. But it's not just about saying no to, the point that Kathy made in our opening comments. It's now about how do we get to yes? And to get to yes requires some very strong collaboration skills and influencing skills across the organization. So the soft skills, I don't know why we call them soft because they're not that soft, are getting more and more important, to navigate, the different requirements of the role.
You're absolutely right, Vanessa. The soft skills, collaboration, all those are very critical skills for finance people to have. I would also add that in this environment, I would say it's very important for the finance and accounting people to also understand the business. They should understand, be able to talk business as well as their business partners. And only then they can, first of all, understand what challenges they are facing and how to basically explain what is happening in the business. But also then have in-depth knowledge so that they can actually come up with some ideas and solutions and suggestions in terms of how to drive the business. So what are the key drivers of the business? They need to understand that. They need to be able to articulate that and make the business. The numbers are numbers, but you want to go beyond the numbers and talk about the business. What are the drivers for the business? How do you create value? Things like that.
And I agree, all of those. And I would just add, too, that in terms of how, I really recommend that finance professionals leave finance and get into the business, or at least have a business partnering role, which is often the one that takes the business metrics back to finance, that gets input into the strategic finance piece. And one of the interesting things that we are finding is that more and more, it used to be that the path to CFO was a path through financial reporting. That's no longer the case necessarily. It does still happen for sure, and it's great to have a variety. It's now coming through that strategic finance, that FP&A role is now more prominent in reaching to that CFO role because of all of the things that my colleagues have just mentioned. And then I'm just going to add a stat on top of that. Fortune just put out a survey. And in 2024, what's really interesting in talking about CFOs and how they're advancing, 34% of Fortune's CFOs moved to a president or a CEO role in 2024. That's a huge number in times of change, in times of distress, in times of disruption. Does that sound familiar to anybody right now? Really, that the business relies on that knowledge and that capability and storytelling that the CFO has in order to ascend to that next level. And that's more than a 10% increase from their previous survey. So that is a real interesting shift in our environment as financial professionals and CFOs.
And I would just add to that, and you're absolutely right, Pamela, more and more people are actually moving from CFO to CEO. And I think the reason for that is that I would say at least in the last 5 to 7 years, the CFO has gone beyond just helping the business do their activities well or more effectively or even grow business to a more, I would say, an operator role. When the CFO is actually expected to look for opportunities beyond what the business is doing, create revenue opportunities, look for partnership opportunities, look for investment opportunities. Of course, M&A has always been part of that. But because they are operator in the business and they're seen by boards and investors as well, as someone who's going beyond the finance function and not just CFO, but as an operator, what we talked earlier about CFO, CEO role being combined, they are well positioned to then step to the next level as CEO.
So that's a...
And doing all that while doing it with high level of integrity.
Absolutely.
And that's what our finance training and background, especially if you are a CPA.
You're hired, Vanessa. Thank you.
That's another one for Pamela and her team. But we come to the role with a lot of trust and integrity, and we're trained, right? Ethics, integrity, and this is what investors look for when they look at a CFO. And when you do migrate into these other roles, whether it's a CEO or a different role within the business, you bring that with you. And I do think that it's another part of when you kind of look at C-suite evolution, I actually do see that other C-suite members are looking at the CFO, but even when the CFO changes role, they're still looking at them for that high degree of trust and integrity in how they get things done.
So this brings me perfectly to the question I've been wanting to ask since the beginning, which is that, is this the path to CEO now? Is this the standard path as opposed to before, which was more even at 1 and 3, which is a massive figure, that still shows that, you know, the majority of CEOs in major roles achieved the top job through other pathways. But it seems increasingly that as the CFO mandate expands, as all of the very fine points that you all have made so far continue to become known, that this is for those looking to, you know, ultimately occupy the corner office, that this is the most logical path. So is that the case? And what are the drawbacks to a strategy like that? Like, can you still be pigeonholed even in the mindset of the modern CEO?
Well, I would say that the CFOs are getting better placed now because of the better rounding out of their experiencing, how they are an operator, strategist, and not just the finance leader to step to the next role. But I would say that it's still sometimes the CEO search, when the board is conducting that search, could also be influenced by the circumstances of the organization. What does the organization need in the CEO? Is it really, financial discipline, or is it international experience, or is it something else? And that can actually influence the direction that the board takes with the CEO. So I would say it's not necessarily that, because the CFO is now well-rounded and not just a finance leader, but also an operator and a strategist, that they have the path directly to the CEO. But I think, as Pamela mentioned, it's happening more and more.
Vanessa?
And and it's a very credible path. It's a very credible path to the CEO, and it's one of many paths to the CEO. I do agree, though, that it depends on, you know, where the organization is in its cycle. And organization, they're always, you know, there's a CEO for every moment, right? So you'll have a moment where perhaps you need, if you're, you know, working at a hyperscaler and, you know, you're heading up technology, or technology is the biggest thing for you, you're probably not going to have your CFO be your CEO. You're probably going to have somebody who's, you know, more from a technology background, innovation, et cetera. But that person will work in very, very strong partnership with the CFO. They'll be joined at the hip, as the expression goes. But in another organization, you know, the CFO can be a very credible CEO. So I think it really depends on the organization, what they're looking for in the next leader, what they're looking to drive. But I think what's exciting is it's becoming more of a possibility than it used to be, and the path is now open to CFOs.
So, Pamela, since you're the one who's done it, maybe you could give us a sense of what the difference is, right? Given you've spent many years in CFO roles, you're in a CEO role now. How has the day-to-day changed? Do you have to relinquish some of the responsibilities that you used to covet and cherish? And how do you deal with that?
Yes, this is a short answer.
All right, then. Thank you very much.
I do think that I feel for my CFO. I think they do get more challenge when.
Tiff Macklin knows how you feel, I think, too, at the Bank of Canada.
Oh, I can imagine. And yeah, for sure. Sorry, it just sparked a whole pile of other conversations we could have.
Sorry.
And they're in China right now. And actually, speaking of CFO to CEO, both Manulife and Sun Life, they had fairly recent changes, and both of them are.
Rogers Communications is another one.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a bunch.
I know a bit of those.
Yeah, exactly.
They could be watching now.
Yeah, I think that, listen, the problems become much broader. They become a lot more challenging and perhaps complex. And you have to trust that the CFO knows their job. You're not doing that job anymore. That's another job. And you have a great professional for that. And we just announced a new CFO a couple of weeks ago. Amazing. And it's understanding where your expertise lies, which is putting great teams together, putting great problem solving together, and working together as that executive team, and knowing only the tough stuff comes to you, because if somebody else could have made the decision or figured it out, they would have done it.
Yeah. So then on like risk management calculations, to go back to a point you made very early in the conversation that I was hoping you could all expand on is, given that you can no longer be, even if you want to be, the sort of CFO, right? You need to be able to take risks and take chances. And I think you described it as calculated risks. What goes into those calculations that allows you to be able to lend your support to a certain strategy, particularly in these very economically uncertain times? It requires you to cast forward in a very speculative way, which certainly numbers don't really help all that much, right? And maybe Atul, we could start with you, because being in banking and being certainly heavily in the residential real estate world, which is the subject of absolute wild speculation at the moment. How do you determine what risks seem worth taking?
Well, I would say that anybody who has spent time in the finance function would have dealt with many uncertainties. You're right. Right now in Canada, because of the economic environment and the real estate market slump, there is, of course, pressure on banks. But that's not one example of it. There are many other situations that have happened over the years. And CFOs, I would say, actually have a very unique perspective on how to distill it down to some of the key metrics or drivers that either could go wrong in a scenario or could go right in the scenario, and what is the band in which you are playing, and therefore how do you actually basically create a set of scenarios that you can explain to your peers and articulate to the board as well. And what is the risk appetite that you have as a company, as a board, that you are willing to play in? So I don't think it's very difficult, actually. Uncertainty is always there. And banks are actually, I would say, more adept at dealing with that than most organizations. And Canadian banks in particular are very good at managing risk. And they have come through in the last 2-3 years, despite the uncertainty, quite very well. So I think the CFOs can play a very big part of that, deciding what is the bandwidth in which they're going to take risk.
Vanessa, did you?
I fully agree. I don't even know that I can add to that, other than saying everything you said for your industry applies to every other industry too. And this is where the better the CFO understands the business, the industry, and the strategy, the better the output can be. And the role the CFO can really play is on an executive team. If they understand the strategy as well as everybody else, their financial skills can actually give them the edge in terms of pointing out what those risks can be and how we could potentially mitigate those risks, right? The CFO is the person who's thinking, okay, if I pressure test this model, how thin is the margin here, right? And do I just have a 5% risk of error, or do I have a 20% risk of error, right? So, and I don't mean error from a financial statements perspective, but things going wrong or an impact to the organization if said strategy did not pan out, and so I think it's doing all of those things, but also the deeper you understand, the landscape, the strategy, the more you can pressure test these things. And honestly, if you have a really great CEO as a partner, it's not that difficult, as Atul said. You say, hey, and your colleagues around the table, around the C-suite, you say, hey, we're all in this together. This is the strategy, but here's the risks as we see them. Here's what could go wrong, and here's how we put together some potential mitigating factors. And then it comes back to those influencing skills, because once you communicate that and you're able to influence and collaborate, I would say most people kind of get it. Most people get it. So it's not a tug of war per se. It's really more about how do we go into it, with a more open-minded but eyes wide open, right, approach.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think it's taking the insights that come naturally to the CFO position. I think it's synthesizing, which we're very good at, storytelling, which we're very good at, and then making a calculated, informed judgment. And we're taught that as part of our discipline as we grow up. And so we're really good at it by the time we get to the CFO position. And what this analogy somebody told me right at the beginning of my career has certainly held true. And even in my role now as CEO, the CEO looks out and sees a beautiful green field full of lovely grass and lots of meadow flowers, etc.
Is this where the CFO then sees like the snake?
No, the CFO points out the cow pies and makes sure you don't step on them as you go.
Sorry to step on your analogy there.
I just came back from Australia. I don't want to think about snakes.
That's fair. Or the spiders as big as your head.
Yeah, I saw some of those.
Kudos to us all for making it this far, by the way, without mentioning the letters AI together.
Ooh,
so
true.
But I'm going to ruin that right now. I'm so sorry. But I'll keep it general because there really is so many different ways in which one could approach the subject. But as a CFO, because you have to maintain that integrity, because ultimately the buck stops with you for things that are really sort of core functions of what AI is used for in business these days, how do you incorporate it without taking too much risk, I guess, is what I'm curious to know. So I'm going to keep it general there.
So I'll start by saying this. Pamela talked about some Fortune research, and I also read something similar from Fortune, that when CFOs lead AI, adoption rate is much faster, and any other function is not. So I think they were quoting that adoption rate when CFO is leading AI implementation can be about 70%. Wow. So maybe all of us who are CFOs can take some credit for that success happening. But I think, to me, just as I said earlier, last 5 to 7 years have been a transformation in the CFO role as an operator. I think that in the next 5 to 7 years, there will again be a major transformation in the CFO role. And I would actually say that traditionally, the CFO has been kind of managing scarcity of resources, team members to do the FP analysis that Vanessa talked about, the data, and eventually, very soon, there would be actually abundance of data and abundance of analytics. And the role will change from trying to manage the prioritization of the resources into now you have multiple scenarios, multiple options, and how, as a CFO, you ensure the integrity of the data and which analysis makes sense. As an example, it could a business person may ask for some new scenario to be put together, and without AI, it may take 3-4 weeks for the scenarios to be put together, and maybe a decision to be presented forward. Today, the same thing can be done in a few hours. Through Claude, you can basically feed the data into it and put multiple scenarios that you want to see, and all the calculations, all the PowerPoints, everything can be created within the same day. So you could actually end up that the business teams are not just coming up with an idea for the CFO's team to evaluate, but they may have 10 different scenarios, and which then as a CFO, you have to figure out which one has the right data, first of all. Secondly, which has the right assumptions, and which scenario actually makes sense, and how do you decide that? So instead of managing scarcity of resources, the CFO's role is going to transition to managing abundance. So that, I think, will be transformation.
So before we get to other thoughts, just quickly want to do a quick time check because we're into the part where we were going to take some audience questions. So can I get a quick straw poll on folks who have questions for our panel? That if you could raise your hands, otherwise we'll just keep going with what we're doing. But don't be shy now. Okay, so that makes it easier for me, actually. So let's continue. Pamela, I believe, and if you do have questions, by the way, feel free, like if something occurs to you, raise your hand and I'll make note of it. And Pamela, please go ahead. Look like you wanted to.
No, I was
chime
just
in.
saying I absolutely loved what Atul just talked about, and I think it's incredibly insightful. I now that I think about it, I agree. I think, and it'll be a nice change to move from scarcity to abundance. I like that because we're always trying to do more with less.
That's right.
Now we have too much, and I think that again is where the CFO role will naturally evolve. Is to what is that control environment? How do we know the data is clean? How do we know that that is the right source? And then that common sense that you talked about to drive where you're going to head. And I just love that. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
So I hadn't read about that statistic where if the CFO is running AI, there's a higher adoption rate. That's great. I think we should all just market that. While I hadn't heard about that, it kind of makes sense, right? Because CFOs are, like, we don't get swayed by hype. We don't get swayed by hype easily. And so we tend to go into things in a very thoughtful manner. And so it wouldn't surprise me that when the CFO is leading, some of the AI work, that we're not just investing in passion projects, scatter shots, let's see what happens. It's a lot more thoughtful of an approach, which then would result in a higher, success rate. But I agree with everything you said about the abundance, right? And it does remind me of another article I read, which was that the CFO role, I read this last year sometime, it's now becoming more like a chief performance officer. And I think that ties to everything Atul just said and what Pamela also just said, which is it's, as you have so much data and you have an abundance of all of these data points, and the CFO generally being, high integrity, data consistency, data quality. We don't want 20 different ways to show the same thing. Just, show me that, we've got one source of truth, but it's got to be the right, embedded in the right, on the right foundation. And so the CFOs are now more and more being looked at to make sure that all of the data within the organization, within the enterprise, is actually high quality, high integrity. And this is what companies are using to make business decisions. So it's going beyond, are the financials accurate, to now more, what are we using to make business decisions? And is that accurate? How is that defined? Is it defined consistently? When I say headcounts, is my definition the same as your definition, right? Students, whatever, right? Like there's so many different ways to talk about something, which all leads to organizational confusion sometimes, right? And so CFOs are being looked at more and more to kind of be the arbiter of what that one source of truth is for the entire organization to be able to make the right business decisions.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Given something you said, Atul, about we're on the cusp of another complete transformation of the CFO role, if we were to sit down and have the same conversation in 10 years, what would the CFO role look like then? And, will it just involve continuing to assume other C-suite roles? Will you be the CTO as well?
No, I think the CFO will definitely play the role of a AI enabler. That I see that happening, but in partnership with not just the CTO or CIO, but all the C-suite leaders, because it has to always be a collaborative approach. Business is not done by one individual, and the entire team has to move together. So that's how it will actually evolve. But if you look at it down the road, I think, as Pamela also mentioned, more and more CFOs are getting so well-rounded, and their experience set has become so evolved in understanding the business, serving as an operator, and not just a reporting function, that they will actually come more and more into the CEO role. So I think at some point that is going to happen more likely than not. And maybe, I think you mentioned 34%, it could even be 74% on the road. That I think is more likely, but not taking over all the roles, other C-suite roles.
Pamela, do you have any thoughts of where we'll be in a decade, other than
I
all
don't
of us
know
being
where
much
we're
more
going to
handsome?
be next year, let alone in a decade. I think one constant is that it's going to evolve, and it's going to keep evolving quickly. It has come so far in the last 10 years or so. I think we're going to just see that continue. How is a really interesting concept, and There will be other senior C-suite roles that emerge. So we're already seeing chief digital officer. That didn't exist 10 years ago. Chief risk officer actually didn't really exist 20 years ago. And so, as each business cycle comes, there are new things, new skills. And yes, our role has become much more rounded. I think that will continue, but there will be new things that come up. So you will always, it takes a village. It is a team sport to run an organization. And so what those roles are will likely evolve and change. I don't think the fact of a CFO role is likely to change, but the ingredients in that CFO role are going to change.
Did you have anything to add, Vanessa? Otherwise,
I think we're all hesitant to predict the future because
Sure.
that never ends well.
And we'd be economists.
And we'll be. But it's interesting. I read just last week actually that Mark Zuckerberg is building himself like an AI twin, where he has like an AI CEO. So, and it's because he actually truly thinks that AI could take his role. So he's building an AI twin. So he has an AI CEO, which made me think, wow, would we also get like a AI CFO, right? And I mean, this is stuff of just craziness, but is it really? Because when you think about what's changed so dramatically, I was on a call, just yesterday, an internal call, and we were talking about how technology has changed so much. What we're able to do, what Claude can do today, was not even possible 6 months ago. Like nobody thought it could happen 6 months ago. And, and we were talking about it in the context of engineering and other things, but it's absolutely true. Like we sat back when ChatGPT came out, we're all like, oh my gosh, what is this? And then some people thought, oh, well, it can't do human reasoning. And, you had the adopters and the dissenters. And the reality is it's still evolving at such a rapid pace. And 6 months ago, what some of these tools could do, very dramatically different from what they can do today. And I think it's going to be the case 6 months from now. So I don't know what it means for CFOs, but I think it's actually very exciting. It's also scary because it means that the role of the CFO will have to change. The role of our teams will have to change completely. How we do the work of finance is going to have to change completely. And we're all still trying to figure it out. So it's a scary time, but a super, super exciting time, and I just can't be more excited that I'm a CFO. But, every now and then at 2 a.m, I think, oh my God, this is all happening really quickly, So that's another thing that we all have to contend with.
So when you're having those thoughts at 2 a.m., and I'll make this the last question before we break for lunch, is how do you maintain that critical level of trust and integrity and sort of governance infallibility that is so inherent to the CFO role that I know we've discussed a little bit now, but given how everything is in flux, given how Claude is taking potentially things out of your hands to some extent, right, and just sort of doing it themselves, how do you maintain that level while incorporating these technologies and going with the flow and evolving with the expansion?
I think part of it is leaning in. I think part of it as our background and training, certainly as a CFO, has demonstrated time and again, is that ability to synthesize information, that professional judgment, and the other thing I would say is that professional skepticism is really important. And that's something that I'm concerned about the students coming up today. They miss out on some of that. I can look at a spreadsheet, and I'm sure that Atul and Vanessa look at a spreadsheet, and they're like, there is something wrong in there. They might not pinpoint what it is. I don't think today's students have that skill, and we have to be better at training them and teaching them, and to be ready for all of these changes that we're seeing at a senior level. We have to be able to train differently, educate differently the young people or those who are new to the finance world in getting those skills. And I just digress slightly for a moment. I was at my meetings last week down under, and we talked about the fact that in an educational situation, the whole point of higher education is to train people, make them ready for the workplace. How are you making them ready for the workplace when you're not allowing AI into an exam environment? You're shutting it down when you get to the workplace, and the expectation now is that you must be adept at AI. You must know how to prompt you. How do we change that whole paradigm in terms of what education means? How do we prepare the next generation? Because that also is a very key role that the CFO has. You are preparing succession. You are preparing those who come after you. You're paying it forward, you're paying it back. How are you preparing those new people coming into the finance world to take on these senior roles and to have that judgment, skepticism, synthesizing, storytelling quality?
That's a great note to end on. And thank you all very much for your insights and your thoughts. It's just an incredibly fun conversation. I could have kept it going for a long time, but then those numbers turned red on the screen there, and I just got absolutely terrified. So not gonna question the color change. For those of you who are watching remotely, though, you will in a moment or two see a QR code show up on your screen that will allow you to give feedback to help us improve on the Globe and Mail events that we do. And of course, those of you who are here in person, you can yell at me right now, and that, or I can also give you my mother's phone number. That's all perfectly acceptable. But in all seriousness, this has been incredibly enlightening conversation. I could not be more grateful to Pamela, Atul, and Vanessa for sharing your thoughts, sharing your insights. Thank you all so much. I think they all have earned a brief but impressive, loud round of applause. Well, that was exactly what I asked for. Thank you. And I hope you all have an excellent rest of your day. And I think that does it for me. So good afternoon.
Thank you.